Welcome to Novara Live. Sorry for the slight delay. Only 30 seconds of that was me powdering my forehead. I discovered last Friday that the lights had got a bit more aggressive. Still a little bit of shine here. We are only talking about one story today. I have in front of me the entire 30 million? 3 million? I don't know. I have about 40 pages here, but we've
2 Eiffel Towers.
The height of 2 Eiffel Towers.
So that's a small font.
I don't have that in front of me, but we do have a fair few of the emails from the Epstein files. We've chosen some highlights. And that is what we're going to talk about for the next hour because there is so much in there. It is really like, you know, if you were a researcher and you're looking for like a treasure trove to explain how elite society works, this is kind of it, released by the Department of Justice last Friday. I'm, of course, joined by Ash Sarkar. What am I doing? I'm babbling before I've introduced you.
Well, I mean, look, there's so much for us to talk about, but one of the things that I really want to get into is the way in which elite financial interests, the warping and distortion of state functions, and also gender are all working together here. Karl Marx, a man full of bon mots, he talked about the bourgeoisie being a system of wives in common, right? Effectively a form of prostitution. And so what he was referencing then is the sort of tendency of, you know, the capitalist class to stray beyond the boundaries of marriage as a form of social lubrication. And I think that is exactly what you've been seeing here with the systemic sex trafficking that Epstein took part in.
Very interesting. We are going to be talking about lots that isn't sex trafficking because there's also lots of, I suppose, corruption, bad judgment, and just embarrassing exposés. At the end of this episode, talking of embarrassing exposés, me and Ash are going to answer any of your questions. Honestly, no holds barred for a Q&A. We'll probably also be asking for your money because we want to expand this organisation, of course. Before we do that, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As ever, don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments. And we're actually going to advertise something else before we start. There's going to be an event coming up, the first Downstream IRL of the year, where Aaron Bastani will be sitting down with our very own Ash Sarkar for the London launch of her book, Minority Rule. Your fantastic book, Ash.
Well, I don't know. Like, things just keep happening. So I updated the book and wrote a new afterword to take into account Donald Trump's election, to think about Zoran Mamdani, to talk about left party formations, for instance, in Belgium. And then just more news kept breaking. So at this point, I'm like, oh my God, I don't talk about Mandelson and Epstein and possible market manipulation because that illustrates really well some of the points I'm trying to make about the way in which financial interests completely warp and undermine democracy. I haven't talked about immigration enforcement basically being a fascist military force in parts of America because all these news stories kept breaking. So once the paperback launch has happened, I think I'm going to have to do that thing of being like, there's an afterword and then there's an afterword.
Yeah, you can have a third edition. The US Justice Department on Friday released more than 3 million pages of documents on the deceased child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, who died in 2019 in suspicious circumstances, was facing trial for sex trafficking minors. Now, he's believed to have groomed and trafficked at least dozens of underage girls, potentially hundreds. Many alleged victims describe horrific abuse at the hands of the financier and his associates. So what do these newly released emails reveal? Well, more than anything, they are once again evidence of how extraordinarily well-connected Epstein was. They include extended exchanges with political leaders and the world's richest men. On this show, though, I imagine we will actually be talking about more of the Epstein files as we go on, but on tonight's show, we're going to hone in on 3 relationships. That between Epstein and Prince Andrew, that between Epstein and Bill Gates, and the relationship between Epstein and Peter Mandelson. I think each shows a different aspect of his modus operandi. We'll start with Peter Mandelson, pictured here, speaking to an anonymous woman in his underpants. It's not clear when this picture was taken, but the BBC are reporting they have located it to Epstein's apartment in Paris. The picture doesn't prove very much beyond the fact that Epstein and his friends like to hang out in their underwear. Many of the email exchanges released between Mandelson and Epstein very much do, though. The first details from the leaks that the British media picked up on concerning Mandelson and Epstein concerned money and money that Mandelson and his partner had received from Epstein. So on Friday, the Financial Times reported that Mandelson's husband received thousands of pounds from Epstein. They found in the release emails which showed Ronaldo Avila da Silva had asked Epstein in September 2009 for £10,000 to fund an osteopathy course and other related expenses. Epstein replied to that request, "I will wire your loan amount immediately." And this was da Silva's reply. "Dear Jeffrey, hope this finds you well. Just a brief note to thank you for the money which arrived in my account this morning. Best, Ronaldo." And I suppose there's not much about these emails that are cute, but it already says osteopath in training, and he's only just been given the money. So clearly someone with some ambition. This transfer was made shortly after Epstein was released from prison for soliciting sex from minors as young as 14, and while Mandelson was Trade Secretary and de facto Prime Minister. Now, we'll discover that in a moment had particular relevance. So he was receiving this money or his partner was receiving this money while he was in a very, very important job in government. Before we get to what he was doing, what Mandelson was doing in 2009 while his household were getting these payments, let's go to some other payments between Epstein and the Mandelson household. So on Saturday, the FT dug out documents showing that in 2003 and 2004, Mandelson received a total of $75,000 from Epstein. It's unclear what the payments were for. Mandelson and his partner say they have no recollection of receiving them. They haven't denied it, though. Presumably, you could just check your bank statements and then you'd be able to deny it. So having no recollection, it seems a bit odd in this scenario. At the time of those transfers, so the ones in 2003, 2004, Mandelson was out of government, but he was an MP. And, this is interesting, no payments from Epstein were included in his register of interest. So if those transfers were in fact made, that would imply wrongdoing. So that's what Mandelson and his husband got from Epstein. But what did Epstein get from Mandelson? Well, that's where this all gets particularly outrageous and perhaps even treasonous. Because in 2009, when Mandelson was business secretary and de facto deputy prime minister, he got into the habit of forwarding market-sensitive information to his financier friend in advance of anyone else finding out. So in June 2009, Mandelson forwarded an internal memo from a UK government special advisor to the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Now, the memo discussed sensitive and confidential government policy that the government was considering selling assets. Epstein then asks what saleable assets, and Mandelson responds, land, property, I guess. Now remember, this is highly sensitive, confidential information being sent to the Prime Minister and some of his closest ministers and advisors, casually being forwarded to Mandelson's financier child sex offender friend, right? So it's supposed to go to the Prime Minister and his closest associates in government. It's market sensitive. No one else knows about it. He just forwards it to Epstein. This seems to be part of a pattern. So in May 2010, 3 days after an election in which Labour lost their majority, Mandelson emailed Epstein to say that there would be a €500 billion bailout, which was almost complete. Very, very significant again. Epstein asked Mandelson, "Are you home?" Mandelson says, "Just leaving number 10. Will call." Right. So that suggests that Mandelson is sitting in number 10. He's found out that there's going to be a €500 billion bailout, in the coming hours or days. And while he's still in number 10, he emails this information. That's what I assume from that exchange. He's emailing this information to Epstein. Epstein says, "Give me a call." He's like, "Oh no, I'm still in number 10. The moment I get out, I'll give you a call and fill you in on everything." This is probably the most shocking revelation in regard to Mandelson. So it's an exchange with Epstein about the then Chancellor Alistair Darling's plans to introduce a banker's bonus tax. Now, Epstein and Mandelson, who is then business secretary, appear to both be against this idea. And this is the exchange. This is how they discuss this. So these are emails. So you read from bottom to the top, which sort of initially seems sort of slightly confusing, but once you learn to do that, it all makes sense. So Jeffrey Epstein says, "Should Jamie call Darling one more time?" So Jamie being Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, Darling being Alistair Darling. They said that JP Morgan alone was over the 500 million said to be needed. And then Mandelson says, "Yes, and mildly threaten." So he's encouraging Jamie Dimon to threaten the Chancellor. He's business secretary at the time. Epstein says, "Can we speak?" And then Mandelson says, "Does it make more sense to offer more for the small business fund in exchange for a reduction in tax?" So they're discussing how JP Morgan can influence, or the boss of JP Morgan can influence Alistair Darling. And Mandelson is suggesting that Jamie Dimon threaten Alistair Darling. And then they're discussing, what are the quid pro quos that JP Morgan could suggest? Could they say, we'll invest a bit more in this business fund or withhold investment here or there? Right. So the current business secretary, or the then business secretary, encouraging his pedo mate to encourage a top banker to threaten his own government. Now, that exchange took place on the 17th of December 2009. This is a Reuters article published 12 days later. So this is potentially the outcome of that exchange. Jamie Dimon calls Alistair Darling on UK bonus, or UK bonus tax. And so here you can see JP Morgan Chase and co-chief executive Jamie Dimon expressed concerns to UK Finance Minister Alistair Darling about the country's 50% tax to be levied on bankers' bonuses over £25,000, London Telegraph reported on Monday. In a recent phone call, Dimon spoke about the bank's plans to build its European headquarters in London's Canary Wharf for £1.5 billion as a way of demonstrating the bank's commitment to the city, the paper said. Dimon did not make explicit threats to scrap plans to build the headquarters, according to the paper. However, sources close to the bank told the paper that JP Morgan was mulling significantly scaling down the plans for the past 2 months. Right? So there's this encouragement. Mandelson says, maybe Jamie Dimon could threaten him. And there's this report that there were these implicit threats. Jamie Dimon at the time, as I say, was head of JP Morgan. And it appears, so while all of this was going on, remember this was sort of the tail end of a Labour government, Mandelson may have had his eyes on a job at JP Morgan. So this email about sort of the threat was 2009. In 2010, there was an election. Labour lose that election. Labour is still in government, though, because remember that no one won a majority. Labour became the second largest party. And 5 days after that election, Epstein and Mandelson had this exchange. Again, you read from the bottom to the top. Most people think if I hadn't been there, GB would have lost all our seats, not just 100. Cannot check quotes. They would never agree. So that's sort of Mandelson saying, we lost, but if I hadn't been there, it would have been even worse. And then Jeffrey Epstein says to him, I am on your team. That being said, as currently written, the chances of a JP Morgan position would be, seems like sort of saying difficult or something. But basically they're discussing whether or not Peter Mandelson is going to be able to get a JP Morgan position. Mandelson ultimately didn't get a job at JP Morgan and went on to found his own consultancy firm, Global Counsel. However, he did seem keen to gain JP Morgan as a client for his new consultancy. So this is an email to Epstein on Christmas Day, 2010. Again, on Christmas Day. The details here are bizarre, aren't they? So this is Peter Mandelson to Jeffrey Epstein, reflecting on our phone call. I hope I can do something with JP Morgan. I told Lazard that I have been asked to do an event in China for JP Morgan, as well as dinner in Hanoi for Barclays and an evening in London for HSBC. They say they're happy with this. What they won't accept is my travelling around generally with another bank's name on my ticket. Where appropriate, they want me to bear the Lazard brand, push their business their way. Lazard will help my own Global Counsel's brand. Lazard, though, said that if in the course of Global Counsel I am helping deals that involve other banks, they will be grown up about that. They have their own close relationship with JP Morgan Barclays. So he's working with this bank, Lazard, but he also wants to work with JP Morgan. And he says, so if I'm going to do something for JP Morgan, it should be a discrete Global Counsel project, something that does not directly compromise my Lazard relationship and which also does not trample on Tony's territory, presumably Tony Blair. At this stage in my post-ministerial life, I am learning, but I am a quick learner. My aim is to acquire enough knowledge and networks, always about networks, in time to participate in real deals. I do not want to live by salary alone. That's why I need to do as much as possible to build with JP Morgan. So this is Peter Mandelson. He's sort of been giving this advice to JP Morgan unofficially while he was in government. And now he's sort of begging Epstein, basically, to try and get him business with JP Morgan because he doesn't want to just live by salary. He wants to be, I suppose, brokering deals where you then get a percentage of that deal because that's where the real big money is. Other emails show Mandelson and Epstein discussing whether $1 million a year would be enough to take on an advisory job at Deutsche Bank. They think it's not enough. They think he deserves more. And Epstein appeared to bring the chair of JP Morgan in on that discussion. So this is an email from Epstein to the chair of JP Morgan, Jez Stanley. Let's talk tomorrow about PT and Deutsche Bank. Ash, I'm sure Mandelson would deny all of this, but there is a pretty clear narrative emerging, which is that Mandelson was very close with Epstein, who was very close to all the financiers of New York. Mandelson gave Epstein information. Epstein gave Mandelson money, and Epstein provided Mandelson with those connections, which would help him become very, very rich after leaving government. So it looks on the face of it, again, this is sort of what we're inferring from these emails. You can sort of decide for yourself whether any of this constitutes a smoking gun. But this looks a lot like a very corrupt relationship. I mean,
one thing is undeniable from when you look at the dates and the timestamps of those emails. Peter Mandelson, while in government, was leaking market-sensitive information to a Wall Street insider. You can't get around that. And as far as I know, Peter Mandelson hasn't done anything to dispute the authenticity of these emails. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the advice that he was giving to Jamie Dimon via Jeffrey Epstein to mildly threaten the UK government, that's happening while Peter Mandelson isn't just a Labour MP or a Labour Lord, he's in the government. He's a minister. He's bound by cabinet collective responsibility. So this is an example of someone working against the interests of the government of which he is a part. That is absolutely not allowed. It's an absolute breach of the ministerial code. And I would suggest that if you're trying to get, the CEO of an American bank to mildly threaten one of your cabinet colleagues, I mean, that's not just undermining your government's interests. It looks to me like you're undermining the country's interests, the nation's interests. And then you've got this matter of the loans, which appear to be taking place when Peter Mandelson is an MP around 2003, and then later again, he's a minister in 2009. I would be very interested to know, considering that the £10,000 for the osteopathy course was termed a loan by Epstein himself, whether any of that money was ever paid back. I would be very interested to learn whether any of the £75,000 that was wired in 3 tranches of 25,000, whether any of that was paid back as well, or whether it was a sort of, we're friends, you're a government minister, your salary is going to be under scrutiny. It's certainly not as much as you could make in the private sector. So consider me your ATM, but the quid pro quo is what?
Also, I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about the intersection of power, sex, money. And this email, let's talk tomorrow about PT and Deutsche Bank, which is to Jez Stanley from Epstein in, the mid-2010s when, actually that's just after the election, so just when Mandelson's looking for a job. Jez Stanley is...
Staley.
Is it Staley? Sorry. Jez Staley is featuring in the top story on the FT today because he, it appears, exchanged emails with Epstein about someone called Snow White, who sounds like, the implication seems to be that they were someone who was likely procured for sex. Now, I'm sure there are denials here as well, but that would absolutely be the intersection, right? Because you've got Epstein, who is very close to the boss of, the top bank, because they seem to share, I suppose, sexual deals or whatever. I mean, again, this is all sort of implied by these emails. There's no smoking gun. And Jeffrey Epstein also gets great information from this government minister, and then he's helping this government minister get a job with his friend who just happens to run a bank, who happens to have a common relationship with this so-called Snow White person. So it sort of really combines them all.
The Snow White emails are kind of weird because it involves correspondence between different individuals and Jeffrey Epstein. So what happens in the Snow White email between Jez Staley and Jeffrey Epstein is that Jez Staley says, say hi to Snow White for me. And there's no context for that. Lots of people were like, who's Snow White? And he was like, oh, this is nothing. I've never had any interaction with him that wasn't professional. stop being so prurient with your interest. And then with this tranche of the Epstein files, there are two really important emails. One is Jeffrey Epstein emailing a woman saying, I want you to buy a Snow White costume. I want to take photographs of you. And she's like, yep, I'll do that. And then there is another email from another woman who's unidentified, who's sort of saying, whoever was in that Snow White costume, got effed twice. So you put all those things together, and how it looks like, I think, for your average reader is that here's a woman who was procured for the purposes of sex. She was instructed about what to wear, and she had sex with at least one person. Whether she was paid or whether it was something else, we don't know. That evidence isn't there. But I think your average reader would say procured for the purposes of sex. And so Jess Daly is still saying, I've got no recollection of meeting this Snow White. The email from him, especially because it's on the same day, as far as I understand it, as the email from the woman saying, hey, that woman in the costume got F twice, seems pretty difficult to keep denying. You're going to have to do the shaggy, it wasn't me. And I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail, but I think the key point is this, is that with Peter Mandelson, there's the picture of him in the Y-fronts. There's that birthday message where he's like making reference to interesting friends and yum yum and stuff like that. It's weirder if it's not sexual at all. Do you know what I mean? And it sort of seems to me that regardless of whether or not these men knew about the specific involvement of underage and trafficked minors, right, women who were victims, or whether they thought that Jeffrey Epstein was simply someone who procured the services of paid sex workers, or whether they thought, whether he thought that Jeffrey Epstein was like a kind of sexual libertine who was, leading a bit of a Playboy Mansion kind of life. I think there's something which is clear to the dynamic, which is in order to have this network of individuals working for each other's interests in a world where financial dealings are low trust, cutthroat, characterized by betrayal, that what the sexual networking does is establish a kind of fraternity and shared experience and we're all in this together. That's what I think it does.
I think looking at the time and how long our script is, it's going to be more useful if we do our Q&A on a different day, which means that I now, in the middle of this show, when we've got 3,500 people watching, I'm going to do the fundraising ask. So instead of us sort of doing this whole new show where we do a Q&A and ask for your money, I'm going to do it now. We've got 3,500 of you watching. We really, really, really want to boost the number of you who are paying subscribers as well as enjoyers on YouTube. So if you aren't already, please do go to novaramedia.com/support. Donate whatever you can afford, be that £1 a month, be that £5 a month, be that £20 a month, and whatever you feel you can afford. It will be incredibly helpful to making sure that we can keep continuing doing what we're doing. I'll probably put a bunch of these asks into this show as well, because we've got so many of you watching. Really, really appreciate having all of you watching, and a fantastic show ahead. We're going to go back to Peter Mandelson because investigators, including Dan Needle at Tax Policy Experts, are still digging into these files to uncover the full extent of market-sensitive information shared between Mandelson and Epstein. So this is, again, you read from top to bottom. So on the morning of May the 10th, Mandelson appeared to boast that he had finally got Gordon Brown to agree to resign. So he finally got him to go. And you can see Epstein says, I have faith. The value of some chapters in your book should now increase. Commenting on another part of the email chain shared by Gabriel Pogrund at the Times, Dan Needle said this: Gabriel understates what's happened here. We can tell from this version of the same email chain that Mandelson's last email was sent at 4:02. Brown's resignation was made public at 1919. This implies Mandelson leaked price-sensitive information to a Wall Street insider. So again, if you get this information before it's made public, you can make trades, right? The fact that a prime minister is resigning, that moves the market. So if you find 3 hours before, if you find that out 3 hours beforehand, you're put at a great advantage, which is why leaking this stuff is very serious. For his part, Gordon Brown doesn't seem pleased. I don't think he knew that any of these emails were being sent at the time. And today, he wrote to the Cabinet Secretary demanding an inquiry. So he said, I have today asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate the disclosure of confidential and market-sensitive information from the then Business Department during the global financial crisis. On September the 10th last year, I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary to ask him to investigate the veracity of information contained in the Epstein papers about the sale of assets arising from the banking collapse and communications about them between Lord Mandelson and Mr. Epstein. That inquiry led to a response on November the 19th that no departmental record could be found of any information or communication from Lord Mandelson to Epstein on these issues. But it goes on. Given the shocking new information that has come to light in the latest tranche of Epstein papers, including information about the transfer to Mr. Epstein of at least one highly sensitive government document as well as other highly confidential information, I have now written to ask for a wider and more intensive inquiry to take place into the wholly unacceptable disclosure of government papers and information during the period when the country was battling the global financial crisis. Given the public interest in this, I have asked that the results of the inquiry be published and done so as soon as possible. Ash, if you're Gordon Brown, you're going to be pissed, right? Because so a general election had taken place. Labour had, were no longer the largest party, but, it was up in the air whether or not they would strike a deal with the Lib Dems or whether the Lib Dems would go with the Tories. The Tories had become the largest party, but far short of a majority. He's, presumably taking advice from Peter Mandelson as an honest broker, right? He's Deputy Prime Minister, he's the Business Secretary. Peter Mandelson sort of encouraging him to go, then bragging about it to his pedo financier friend in New York City and sharing market-sensitive information to a guy who he's going to, try and persuade to help him get a job afterwards at JP Morgan. And Gordon Brown, it's worth remembering, you've got Tony Blair, you've got Peter Mandelson, two of the sort of most, I suppose, gross examples of new Labour politicians who think, well, I've done my time in government, now I'm going to make the millions that I really deserve, right, through my connections. Gordon Brown didn't do that, right? I think he was, criticise whatever policy you like, but I think he was in there because he wanted to reduce poverty. And since leaving government, he has basically dedicated his life to trying to raise awareness about poverty and other similar issues. And this arsehole, who he brought back into government to make trade secretary, was giving him advice to stand down, bragging about it to his pedo mates, and then on the make to make millions, which he did become a multimillionaire, by the way, through all of these connections. Like, Gordon Brown, and not known to be a forgiving man either, he's going to be pissed.
Well, the thing is, I hate to bring it all back to Labour factionalism, but I do think that that's really relevant to the story, because before there was Corbyn and Starmer, before there was Starmer and Streeting, there was Blair versus Brown. And it was a nasty factional battle which played out on the government benches. So we're not just talking about, what the composition of the membership was like. It was a out and out dogfight that was taking place every day in the cabinet, across the papers, negative briefings. And Gordon Brown carried the can for economic policy decisions which were made, sure, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, but under Tony Blair's premiership, right? Tony Blair goes in 2006, I think it is?
Yeah, or 2007.
2006, 2007. Gordon Brown doesn't get a honeymoon period, really. Right? Almost immediately, he's sort of discredited by the so-called bottled election, the election that never was. And then you have a global financial crisis to deal with. And you've got this snake in your house, quite frankly, which is Lord Mandelson, who, if you think about reasons why he comes back into government after having had to resign in disgrace over undeclared loans, I guess this is back in 2003, again, 2003, 2004. Gordon Brown is going, okay, the economy is in the toilet. I need absolutely anything that can drum up some kind of investment and good business relations, while also dealing with the fact that if you are soft on the banks and soft on bankers' bonuses, I'm going to be beheaded in the street. And you've got this guy who's working for his own interest. The thing that I would say is that, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. You know that this is a guy who is operating in his own interest. I can understand the kinds of political pressures that were on him in terms of the economy, and I also can understand the internal factional pressures that were on Gordon Brown at the time. But I don't think it's true to say that at that point it was unclear who this guy is. I mean, what's even less forgivable than Gordon Brown, who you think, okay, is under a particular kind of pressure there? It's Keir Starmer. Brings him back, to be American ambassador. In the first round of revelations in the birthday messenger, I remember we talked about it at the time, they weren't new revelations in terms of the closeness of Mandelson to Epstein. They simply added colour, right? We knew about the close friendship. We knew about them hanging out after his conviction. It's just there was something about that phrasing, calling him my best pal, that it was no longer tenable in optics sense. This material genuinely does add something new, because what it shows is that Peter Mandelson was very willing to use private, confidential, restricted information that he was party to simply because of his role in government to advance his own interests.
Yeah, Gordon Brown brought Peter Mandelson back into government as part of his government of all the talents. So when he became prime minister in 2007, he says, I want a government of all the talents. Then in October 2008, so after the financial crisis, he makes Peter Mandelson a lord and then makes him first Secretary of State, so de facto Deputy Prime Minister, and Secretary of State for Business, Enterprise and Regulatory Reform. Perhaps he should have known better, but I suppose, as you're saying, he felt like he was on the ropes and he had to do something to sort of signal, the serious people are in the room, the serious people who leak financial secrets to pedo financiers. Parts of the media are doing a decent job at trawling through the Epstein files to uncover potential wrongdoing by Peter Mandelson, and lots of what we're talking about today comes via the Financial Times. One journalist over the weekend, though, appeared more relaxed about it all.
Peter Mandelson and I met for the first time almost exactly 50 years ago on a march protesting against apartheid. It's no secret here in Westminster that over the following 3 decades, he and I worked together, first as student activists, then as television journalists, and as elected politicians. He's appeared more than once on this programme. We were, and are still, friends. His political career was long and illustrious. Mine was brief and disastrous. It's a friend's privilege to tell you that you are ill-suited to a role, even that you are a complete idiot. 20 years ago, Peter was honest enough to make it clear to me that my lack of tact and distaste for compromise meant that I'd be better suited to journalism than party politics. I have not spoken personally to Lord Mandelson about the release this weekend of documents, messages, photographs and videos related to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He was invited to join us this morning, but declined. However, he has told this programme that neither he nor his husband, Ronaldo Avila da Silva, has any record or recollection of receiving payments in 2003 or 2004, or knows whether the documentation is authentic. He does accept that Ronaldo received a loan of $10,000 from Epstein whilst he, Mandelson, was a senior cabinet minister. And he acknowledges that in the same period, Epstein was amongst those who lobbied him on important policy matters. There's no suggestion that Lord Mandelson's done anything unlawful, but I would claim the friend's privilege to tell Peter that he has been, at best, naive and foolish, at worst, greedy and duplicitous. Whatever is true, as far as politics and public office are concerned, for Peter Mandelson, this is the end. The question now is whether the price of his misjudgment is to be paid only by the man himself, or whether those who trusted him and elevated him to the peerage and to one of the highest diplomatic posts available should also share in his ignominy.
I will use my friend's privilege to say Peter Mandelson has been a very silly boy. I mean, I suppose he thought he was being honest, upfront. Maybe he thinks when everyone else, it's lots of people who knew this about Peter Mandelson, maybe not some of this potential insider trading, but sort of knew about the relationship with Epstein. I think you could include Keir Starmer in this, actually. Sort of pretended, I didn't know, and then throw him under a bus. And Trevor Phillips at least is saying, now I'm not changing my position. Maybe that's a good feature for a friend to have. I mean, as a journalist, it's not a great look, that speech.
That was the thing which really galled me, right? Is that you had this sort of compliment by insult thing going on, which was, Peter Mandelson claimed the friend's privilege to tell me that I was more suited to journalism than party politics because of my honesty and lack of tact and aptitude for plain speaking, that kind of thing. Whereas this whole thing is complete horseshit in journalistic terms. I'm sorry, I know that some people get really annoyed when I swear on the show, but sometimes there are no better words. I mean, if you are friends with the disgraced politician, former ambassador, member of the House of Lords, who was not only friends with a convicted paedophile, but now seems to have some very close financial dealings and to have leaked sensitive information. You cannot cover that story. It doesn't matter if you do a piece to camera and you talk about how you met when, who's on the anti-apartheid thing.
Yeah.
And I bet he marched with Martin Luther King too. And he was part of the Match Girls strike. And he was one of the original suffragettes. And, I seem to remember Peter Mandelson throwing himself under the King's horse. I bet he did all sorts of amazing things that just show, what a campaigner in the interest of justice he really is. He just has some bad judgment. It doesn't matter. It also wouldn't matter if he'd gone the opposite route and he'd gone, we're really close friends, but, I saw him shit the bed once or twice. It doesn't matter what you say. Your proximity to this man means that you should not be the person framing the story for a national audience. And it certainly shouldn't be for, one of the most important Sunday news shows that's on British broadcast media. So, when I see stuff like that, I'm not even angry at Peter Mandelson. I'm not even that angry at Trevor Phillips. He's just an opportunist. I'm angry at the chain of editorial decision-making that means you can get someone like that in that position spinning an absolute cock and bull story for a piece to camera. Because real journalism means recusing yourself where you have some kind of conflict of interest. And I think being, bosom buddies with the guy who had financial dealings with Jeffrey Epstein long after his conviction for paedophilia, you should probably recuse yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose he would say, so when he was speaking, we knew about the money transferred to the Mandelson household. We didn't know about the sensitive information that was exchanged. So maybe at that point, Trevor Phillips just thought it was about osteopathy. Peter Mandelson, for his part, hasn't spoken publicly since this latest tranche of revelations. But this is how he explained his relationship to Epstein 3 weeks ago. It was in his first interview after getting sacked as US ambassador.
There's a question many people have. It was one thing to be friends with him in the early 2000s. Quite another to keep your friendship going with him when it was clear and he had a conviction for abusing young women. Why did you stick with him?
Well, it was a most terrible mistake on my part. I believed the story he told in 2008 in his first indictment in Florida. I accepted his story, and I wish I hadn't. I gave my support to somebody because I believed what he was telling me, and it was misplaced loyalty. But I just have to say this to you. While it's had the most calamitous consequences for me, and I regret ever having been introduced to him in the first place. I regret continuing a friendship with him. The crux of this is not me. The crux of this is not the friendship I had 25 years ago with Jeffrey Epstein. The crux of this is that so many hundreds of young women were completely trapped, powerless in a system that did not listen to what they had to say.
And a lot of things to say about that answer. I mean, first off, he said, the friendship I had with Jeffrey Epstein 25 years ago. 16 years ago, he was helping you get a job. Right, so this whole idea, I've suffered terribly from being such a loyal friend. Your friendship was based on this guy linking you up with incredibly rich, powerful people who could give you jobs after you left government, after having, apparently done favors for him while you were in government. Ash, I suppose I want to go to you on Mandelson sort of saying, the focus shouldn't be on me. It should be on these girls. I just want to, I want to give some space, actually, to these women who are abused. This shouldn't actually be about me. This should be about these women.
It's such a line because, of course, the utter betrayal of those women and girls who are trafficked, who are abused, that is a huge part of this story. But it's using that kind of moral posturing to take that suffering and use it as a shield to hide behind. And there is something so new Labour about that. Something so new Labour about being like, actually, the real story is this. And like, we must think about the vulnerable as a way of cultivating cover for your own dirty dealings. It it makes me feel genuinely quite nauseous.
Because as well, the story isn't actually me. Maybe that's an honourable thing to say if people are trying to write a nice story about you. So if you've gone to somewhere where there's a famine and you've helped distribute food, right? And someone is writing a story about you saying, oh, you're such a brave, lovely person because you distributed food to this famine. Then maybe in that interview, you should say, the story isn't about me, actually. I know it's nice to have nice things written about you, but the story is actually about the famine. If the story is that you'd done terrible things, then you can't say, oh, no, the story shouldn't really be about me. Like it doesn't make sense in that context.
But also, like, thinking about what the friendship was between him and Jeffrey Epstein, right? Because it would be one thing if it was like, you know what, we were childhood friends and I don't believe in dropping someone just because they've done something awful. Like, that's not what friendship is about. Like, I would be like, okay, paedophilia though, but I would kind of get it, right? That's kind of a moral position. Life is complicated. Life is difficult. I think that it is defensible to say that you wouldn't abandon someone to whom you had this long-standing, very, very close friendship. The friendship that they had was very much you scratch my back, I scratch yours. There's money, there's power, there's networking, there's references to yum yum and interesting friends. It doesn't seem like a friendship cultivated by, years and years of emotional support and through the hard times and blah, blah, blah. It seems like establishing a kind of mutual patronage network for very powerful people. So saying, oh, my problem was I was too loyal a friend. No, I think it was because you kind of clocked that post-conviction Jeffrey Epstein could still be a very useful man to you. And that's what a lot of other very powerful people thought as well. And why? That's because despite the fact he was convicted, he got basically a sweetheart jail sentence, minimal security, was allowed to work from his own office, that kind of thing. There was a message being sent by the criminal justice system that this conviction doesn't matter, right? Literally doesn't matter. And Peter Mandelson and others, I think, picked up that signal and ran with it.
It wasn't like we should have let's have a friendship where we just provide each other support. It's like you're still getting favors from him. And as we're going to see in our next story, other powerful people were still getting women from him. Let's go to the comms. Let's go to the comments. I was going to say let's go to the comms doc, but that's a bit sort of how the sausage is made. Sugar Clan with a tenor says, thank you, Novara. Curtis J, something towards some brick patterned wallpaper. And for behind Ash, maybe you mean. So
yeah, because there is a problem of having black hair and a black background, which is, I think, I kind of look like a floating Easter egg.
Well, you wore a black top as well.
No, this is brown. You're right.
Thank you so much for these super chats. I am going to remind you that when you give us super chats, Google takes, I don't know, somewhere between 33% and 45%, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but they take a lot of it. So if you want to give us money, which Google doesn't skim loads from, you can donate to us at our website. That's novaramedia.com/support. I know many of you watching will be long-time supporters. Many of you might have been, giving us a monthly donation for years. We appreciate that so much. We are so thankful to you. If you are not already a donor, join our brilliant supporters, many of whom, as I say, I'm sure are watching. You probably already assumed Prince Andrew is a liar when it comes to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But thanks to the 3 million Epstein files released by the US Department of Justice, we now have proof. The lie concerns exactly when Andrew cut off his relationship with Epstein. Some context here. This is one of the images that has haunted Prince Andrew. It's him with Jeffrey Epstein on December the 5th, 2010, walking in Central Park. The visit happened after Epstein was released from prison after being convicted of solicitation of prostitution from a minor, including girls as young as 14. To try clear his name, Prince Andrew told Emily Maitlis this about the visit.
I went to see him, and I was doing a number of other things in New York at the time, and we had an opportunity to go for a walk in the park, and that was the conversation, coincidentally, that was photographed, which was when I said to him, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And by mutual agreement during that walk in the park, we decided that we would part company, and I left, I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward.
So that was very explicit. That photo was taken, we're told, when Prince Andrew briefly visited Jeffrey Epstein to tell him, because he was an honourable friend, and he had to tell him in person that they couldn't really associate anymore. So very concrete, no ambiguity. And it turns out it's a lie. So the Telegraph have a timeline of the contact the two made after that photo was taken. This is from this leak, and I'm not sure if some of it's from previous leaks, but sort of the culmination of everything that's been leaked so far shows this. January the 2nd, 2011, so after that picture was taken, Andrew wishes Epstein a happy new year and asks him to get Johnny to sign an unnamed agreement. He says he is going on his annual retreat and that this week is all about me before the rest of the world starts sucking it out. Oh, Andrew does really need some time for some self-care, doesn't he? February the 9th, 2011, Andrew tells Epstein he thought of him after going to see a very successful organisation last week. February the 25th, 2011, Andrew claims he is not worried about the photograph of him and Epstein. February the 28th, 2011, Andrew discusses the allegations and transferring money to a Leslie for his wages and asks Epstein for advice. Epstein writes if a sum of money sent would be disclosed to the press, it would look like a payoff for the little shit. Andrew tells Epstein, it would seem we are in this together and we'll have to rise above it, and says we'll play some more soon. Ooh. Then, March the 1st, 2011, Andrew emails Epstein asking him to call him. And March the 4th, 2011, Epstein and Andrew discuss their responses to the press. So that very much is not the last time they were in contact. So that was a lie. Out and out lie. The BBC also, I think this one's even more damning. In their reporting of these leaks, have honed in on what Andrew sent Epstein immediately after that trip. So we were told the trip was to break off a friendship. This is what the BBC report. They're in touch on Christmas Day in 2010. And Andrew sent Epstein one of those homemade family messages at Christmas with pictures of his daughters and a photo of himself abseiling on the Shard. In his Newsnight interview, he claimed that in December 2010, he'd travelled to New York to meet Epstein to formally and unequivocally end his relationship with the financier, who by then had served a jail sentence for soliciting prostitution from a minor. But Andrew's own email after that trip, now revealed, gives an entirely different version. Quote, "It was great to spend time with my US family. Looking forward to joining you all again soon," he told Epstein. "I'll call you tomorrow, so I am moving the family up to Sandringham during the day." Now, Ash, it couldn't get more explicit than him telling Emily Mate. I mean, no one believed it in the first place, but he said, I had to go and tell him that our relationship was over. And then, in fact, his email says, "It was great to spend time with you. Looking forward to joining you again soon."
What this demonstrates is that we already knew he was a bad liar, right? I'm physically incapable of sweating, or at least I was for a period of years, but maybe I can sweat now. It maybe showed you that he wasn't the sharpest tack in the box. But I think the strength of his lies, right? His insistence that, it was on this date that I cut off the relationship for good. Obviously, maybe that was too long, but I was too loyal a friend. There's a certain arrogance there. And it's an arrogance which presumes that everything that has transpired between these two men in writing, all of the photos that have been taken of Prince Andrew, or the former Prince Andrew, and Jeffrey Epstein's presence, there's no way this can come to light. And the only reason I can come up with in my head for how someone wouldn't be worrying about this information coming to light is because he thinks his power and his status will protect him. That's the only reason I can think that someone wouldn't go, all right, well, I probably shouldn't tell this lie because if this kind of documentary evidence comes out, then I'm toast. He just presumed it never would. And I think that that's one of the things that needs to be extrapolated from the Epstein files, because the problem with calling it the Epstein files is that it's sort of, it creates almost like a cordon sanitaire around the issue. But I think that level of arrogance and the level of impunity that many of these elite men felt of like, well, I can tell this lie at this point because there's no way this other stuff is going to come to light. I don't think that the former Prince Andrew is unique in thinking like that. And I don't think that Jeffrey Epstein was unique for his wrongdoing either. I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on at the uppermost echelons of society where experience has told them that they don't have to worry about the law, they don't have to worry about journalists, and they don't have to worry about public opinion.
In terms of Prince Andrew, I mean, if you see on our YouTube and you click on popular videos, some of the videos that have gone the furthest involve us discussing Prince Andrew and his, I suppose, gross misdeeds and his lies. So we were quite early to the story. If you want to support more work, which helps expose rich, powerful people who think they are immune from consequences, you can go to novaramedia.com/support. More on Prince Andrew, because the latest tranche of Epstein files contains more photos of Andrew. So here he is crouched over an anonymous woman and looking up at the camera. In another photo, he has his hand on the woman's stomach, though the context, I mean, is very unclear here. Apparently, this can be located to Jeffrey Epstein's New York mansion. But as I say, it's not clear to me that there's any wrongdoing going on there, even if the images are a little bit gross, given all that we know. Other emails, though, are more directly implicating. So in August, Epstein tells Andrew he has, quote, a friend who I think you might enjoy having dinner with. So that's what Epstein tells Andrew. And this is what happens next. Again, read from bottom to top. The Duke, which is what he comes up in the email, isn't it? The Duke says, great. Any other information you might know about her that might be useful to know? Like, what have you told her about me? And have you given her my email as well? Andrew. Jeffrey Epstein says, she, 26, Russian, clever, beautiful, trustworthy. And yes, she has your email. The Duke responds to Epstein, that was quick. How are you? Good to be free. Now that is grotesque because, one, Epstein has just arranged for him to meet up with this woman. All he really knows about her is that she's 26. Andrew at the time is 50. And then good to be free. So in this email where he's soliciting a date with this 26-year-old, I mean, obviously we don't know if she was coerced or if she wanted to meet a prince. I mean, we don't know much about it beyond that. But he's also included good to be free, which presumably is a reference to the fact that this guy is a convicted sex offender, right, who was convicted for procuring minors for sex. So just to sort of casually slip that in when you are about to be set up on a date, I don't know what we want to call it, set up on some kind of meeting with a young, attractive woman, to me is rather grotesque. Another set of emails are particularly embarrassing for the royal family because they suggest that some of these meetings likely took place on royal property. So this is Epstein to the Duke. Already in London, what time would you like me and redacted? We will also need have private time. And then the Duke writes to Epstein, I am just departing Scotland, should be down by 1800. I'll ring you when I get down, if you can give me a number to ring. Alternatively, we could have dinner at Buckingham Palace and lots of privacy. And then Epstein says, BP please. BP being Buckingham Palace. Now, I mean, this is really like, when people are talking about elite sort of impunity, thinking of where is a place where you can have lots of privacy to have a meal, dinner with a convicted sex offender. Oh, I know, Buckingham Palace. Lots of privacy there. That's a nice low-profile place to have dinner with a convicted sex offender. Separate from the release of this latest set of files, the BBC also reported this week on a second alleged victim of Epstein who has claimed she was sent to provide sexual services to Prince Andrew.
The woman is alleging she was flown to the UK by Epstein, and her lawyer says it was to comply sexually with Andrew. She says she was in her 20s and is claiming the sex occurred at Royal Lodge, the 30-bedroom Windsor home the former prince has been asked to leave because of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. This is the first time an accusation has been made involving royal residences.
We're talking about at least one woman who was sent by Jeffrey Epstein over to Prince Andrew, and she even, after a night with Prince Andrew, had a tour of Buckingham Palace. Again,
We don't know more about that. Obviously, I mean, I imagine he would deny that. It also seems to me that the allegation here is that this person was sent by Epstein to do this. Again, we don't know the age or anything like that.
She said she was in her 20s when it happened.
She said she was in her 20s when it happened. Okay, that's important. Ash, I suppose I want your thoughts specifically on these emails, right? So Can you imagine the state of mind where you say, I suppose the good to be free could be referring to something else, but to me it reads like good to be free from jail. Yes, I will meet up with this 26-year-old Russian lady who I know nothing about other than that you think she's attractive.
I mean, you're asking me what I think about the emails, and I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself, which is it is a disgusting level of entitlement, and it's sexual entitlement, and it's a complete disregard for what is underpinning the realities of your sexual access to women who would not be interested in you if you were not a prince, and possibly aren't interested in you, are there because they've been coerced or trafficked or made to in some way. And I think that this is one of the things that we often talk about inequality on this show in terms of material outcomes. We talk about its corrosive effect on democracy. We talk about people's life chances. We talk about access to opportunity. We talk about health and all of that kind of thing. And one of the things that it's almost easy to forget is the way in which wealth, power, status, impunity plays out on these very gendered lines and has a kind of sexual dimension as well, which is you are writing emails like that and you are asking a convicted paedophile to set you up on a date with someone because that's what you think women are for. Like, that's what you think women are for. And for those children who Jeffrey Epstein abused, we looked this up to make sure this was true before we went live. At least one of whom was as young as 14 at the time. These children who are abused don't factor into it because they're not really people the way, you and I, I'm speaking the voice of Andrew, are people. And what's the point of being rich if you can't buy access to women and have them supplied to you, sort of like plucked out and chosen, like you've got a personal shopper for women. And I think that it might seem like a really facile point, which is if you have a class of men who are that rich and that powerful and that beyond the law, obviously there is going to be a kind of enacted misogyny that they're living every day. But they're living that way, every day, and they're so immersed in it they can't even see what a moral cesspit it really is.
Someone in the comments, I can't find who said it now because I can't scroll up, but someone said Epstein knew Prince Andrew's type, which I think is very much implied in this, right? All the information you need to know. I found a woman you'd probably like, right? In August, Epstein tells Andrew he has a friend who I think you might enjoy having dinner with. Yeah, so that's exactly like he knows. They have this relationship where they know what kind of women each other like. Might
enjoy having dinner with, right? And it's like you don't have to be coarse about it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of I don't know if you ever had this, but that very naive view people have of escorting, where it's like, oh, it's just wealthy men who want to take you for dinner for no reason. It's that sort of language and that way of trying to make it more palatable.
Oh, like an escort, literally just to escort you.
No, you're just supposed to escort them to places. No, it's for sex.
Let's move on to Sarah Ferguson. She's Andrew's ex-wife and life partner. She also comes off badly in these latest email releases, although I think maybe in a more humorous way than her partner. The BBC has a summary. Sarah Ferguson, the former Duchess of York, will be further embarrassed by this latest tranche of emails. In 2009, she described Epstein as the brother I have always wished for and enthusiastically gives him details of her latest business ideas. She didn't travel lightly. When visiting him, there's a request on her behalf for 4 apartments. And it goes on. Later in the same year, after the crash of a business venture, she writes to Epstein, quote, I urgently need £20,000 for rent today. The landlord has threatened to go to the newspapers if I don't pay. Any brainwaves? There are lawyers' letters about deals to pay off her creditors and an email from Epstein claiming to have helped her financially for 15 years. The former Duchess of York has been approached for comment. Behind her back, Epstein seems to have been far from complimentary, sending another contact link to a newspaper article about Ferguson with the comment, pic of F from Friday, not the prettiest sight. And then this is what's, really humiliating, I think, for Fergie, because far from cutting ties with Jeffrey Epstein, as Prince Andrew at least claimed he had done, Fergie seems annoyed that Epstein had cut off ties with her. from September 2011, so really late. And this is from Fergie to Jeffrey Epstein. Don't know if you were still on this BBM. I don't know, does that mean the email address to some degree? I'm not sure. But heard from the Duke that you have had a baby boy. So here there's a secret child as well, sort of a side point here. Even though you never kept in touch, I still am here with love, friendship, and congratulations on your baby boy, Sarah. So this is, everyone who's sort of in the public eye likes to pretend, I probably stayed friends with him for longer than I should have done, but I did ultimately cut off ties. This is literally Fergie saying, even though you never replied to my emails, I still love you. I love you. Our friendship's amazing.
Congratulations on your baby boy, if you care whether or not I'm alive.
There was another thing I read about Fergie where she sort of asked for 2 first-class tickets from New York and he'd put her in business. He just thought, this woman is ridiculous. She's an idiot. But again, so I suppose at the start of this, I was saying these 3 relationships we're talking about show different sides of Epstein's modus operandi. And I think with Mandelson, it is how you sort of get close with people in very important government roles who are equally ambitious as you. And that was a very mutually beneficial relationship for Epstein and Mandelson. This, to me, shows how Epstein wanted to sort of get in with stupid, important people, by virtue of birth, and had complete contempt for them, like utter contempt. Like clearly he respected Mandelson. He thought they're in a way similar people, right? Really ambitious, smart, they can make deals. With the royalty, he clearly thinks these people are fools. And he gets in with them by just offering them little tidbits. Have 20 grand here for an apartment, have a nice, attractive woman here.
So this is the thing, is that nothing tells the story of the declining British aristocracy better than these emails, I think. Because what you see that Andrew and Fergie have, it's prestige, but not ready money. So that's why she's scrabbling around and being like, oh no, the landlord's at the door and he's threatening to go to the papers. Oh my gosh. And there's Prince Andrew who can't even, afford to pay for his own sex workers, apparently. And it is that sort of, that horrible declined semi-redundant status of this royal family, which is, sure, they wield all this power in the British press. Even that isn't exactly what it used to be. They're still a somewhat beloved institution. What they have is, because of the veneer of venerability that they can lend to new money, that's basically their role. And so that's why they get in, really close to the Saudis and like all of these other kind of, geopolitically new money. And that's the value of them to Epstein, I think, right? It's, people are drawn to Prince Andrew because he's a member of the British royal family. Epstein wants access to them. He gets that by, paying off some of Fergie's debts and procuring some women for Andrew. But, Henry VIII, it ain't.
We've got over 4,200 of you watching. As I said a little while ago, we were going to do a Q&A at 7 p.m. But given it is 10 past 7 and we've still got 4,200 of you watching, we're going to keep on the Epstein files. But as I said before, the Q&A was going to be very directed towards inviting you to support Novara Media financially. So instead, I'm going to do that in between our stories on this show. So if you would like to be part of the Novara Media project, if you'd like to help us continue to grow, to continue reporting on the things that you care about, please do go to novaramedia.com/support. We really, really, really do appreciate it. For all of you guys who have been with us for the long haul, potentially, supporting us for a decade or so, thank you so much. If you supported last week, thank you so much. If you're going to support this evening, really, really thank you so much. novaramedia.com/support. Maybe let us know in the comments if you are already a supporter, why you're a supporter, why you're about to become a supporter. And we'll try and read out some of those after our next story. One of the most long-standing theories about Jeffrey Epstein is that he maintained his power by blackmailing his ultra-elite peers. Now, after reams of released emails, there still isn't really any smoking gun evidence to that effect. But it doesn't mean there aren't potential clues. And perhaps the strongest one pertains to the paedophile financier's relationship with Bill Gates. Now, this is Bill Gates on the left. Jeffrey Epstein is in the center. And to Jeffrey Epstein's right, which is very relevant, Boris Nikolic. You might not have heard of him, but he's relevant to this story. He was a senior science advisor for the Gates Foundation and a close associate of Epstein. Not clear when that photo was taken. What we do know is that in 2013, Nikolic was let go from the Gates Foundation, and Epstein was advising him on how to handle the departure. Now, related to that process, this is an email Jeffrey Epstein sent to himself in July 2013, and he appears to be drafting a letter from Boris Nikolic to Bill Gates, so two men you saw in that image. And we're going to break this up because it's quite long. So again, this is from Epstein to Epstein, so slightly sort of strange context, but it says, "Dear Bill," the Bill being Bill Gates, "I cannot believe that you have chosen to disregard our friendship developed over the last 6 years. I am aware that accidents happen. It is how each of us has chosen to deal with this unfortunate event that has me dismayed beyond comprehension. You have decided to discharge me from my job. Had Larry, your PR person, tell me that I engaged in morally inappropriate behavior, asked me to be the major actor in a cover-up so that you can maintain the reputation that you have worked so hard to achieve, asked me to recommit to a confidentiality agreement, and have categorically told me that we cannot have any direct ongoing business relationship in total disregard for its impact on the public perception of my reputation." So this is a letter which Jeffrey Epstein is drafting for, it seems, an advisor to Bill Gates who has just been fired and who is not happy about it. So in the next part of the email, we're not going to show you every single sentence from it, it's very long. The email then implies the reason Boris Nikolic has been fired is that Melinda Gates, so Bill's partner and co-director, I suppose, of the Gates Foundation, has found out something she disapproves of. So Melinda Gates has found out something, and the result has been that this man has lost his job. Now, Jeffrey Epstein is navigating Boris Nikolic how to navigate this situation. And in his draft email, he suggests how Bill Gates should have responded to what's referred to here as an unfortunate event which has led to this man's departure. So he says, "If the shoe was on the other foot, I would have said, 'Boris, this is not your fault. I confess to Melinda, you didn't. It was in a moment of weakness, and I will do anything within my power to make it right for you. I have more money than anyone needs, and I assure you I will structure something so that you will not be penalized for my error. Lucky for me, I have enough money to provide you. Though it will not heal the injury, it will make you secure in your future. In addition, I will bend over backwards to make sure your next career is rewarding and on an upswing. I appreciate the fact that this drastically alters your plans and am very aware of the career path you gave up to join the foundation. I am very sorry, but as I believe time heals all wounds, this will eventually pass. In that regard, I suggest I buy you the house that you had your heart set on, and in addition to 5 years of severance, will buy you out of the investment contract we had agreed, 30 to 40% of $100 million partnership. For $30 million in today's dollars, terms and conditions will be agreed. That's what I would have done. And had I been in your shoes. What I did receive, however, was an unfriendly, strongly worded email." So again, this is Epstein in an email to himself, but it seems to be a potential draft of an email that Boris Nikolic, could send to Bill Gates. Presumably, it would, there'd be some editing to go on. And it's saying how Bill Gates should have responded to this incident. So there's an unfortunate incident which upsets Melinda Gates, which means that this man loses his job. Jeffrey Epstein is advising the man who's lost his job, and he's saying, Bill Gates, you've treated this man very badly. This is what I would have done. I would have paid you off handsomely, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, right? Lots and lots of money involved here. And the next bit is the killer, because the draft goes on to make some claims, potentially revelations, which read the right way, could provide leverage for Nikolic if he wanted Gates to agree to the superior terms which are being suggested by Jeffrey Epstein. He says, "That's what I would have done had I been in your shoes." That's from what we read before. "What I did receive, however, was an unfriendly worded email telling me how employable I am and that I should not look to you for any significant financial help in the future. To add insult to the injury, you then implore me to please delete the emails regarding your STD, your request that I provide you antibiotics that you can surreptitiously give to Melinda, and the description of your penis. You also made it clear to me that I am not to refer to redacted, as that is another topic that must remain between the two of us. In return for all of these requests, which I would have done without a second thought, I am not to attend meetings with Melinda. I should continue to provide you the same level of service and dedication that I have done so diligently until you are ready to discard me and our friendship. Now, it's unclear if this draft was ever actually sent to Boris Nikolic, let alone whether a version of this was ever sent to Bill Gates. What this suggests to me, though, is a modus operandi, right? You say to a rich and powerful person, you've treated me badly. I want you to treat me better. And, by the way, I happen to know a lot of damaging things about you. It's also got that very mafia talk. I would have been very loyal. Of course I wouldn't have shared this information. You didn't really even need to ask me. Of course I wouldn't have shared it. But the facts have changed. Epstein would later go on to send himself a more pithy drafted resignation note for Nikolic. So again, sent from Epstein to Epstein. I have decided to resign my position effective immediately with the Bill Gates Foundation. I have not come to this decision quickly or without a great deal of thought. During the past few weeks, I have been caught up in a severe marital dispute between Melinda and Bill. I have the greatest respect for my friends of 7 years and wish them both well. In my role as his right-hand man, I have been asked and wrongly acquiesced into participating in things that have ranged from the morally inappropriate to the ethically unsound, and have been repeatedly asked to do things that get near and potentially over the line into the illegal. Though it was kindly suggested that I make a transition to a new position after my 6 years of servitude, and that Bill would, in his words, give me 2 years severance pay, I feel it would be dishonest to myself and my future, from helping Bill to get drugs in order to deal with consequences of sex with Russian girls, to facilitating his illicit trysts with married women, to being asked to provide Adderall for bridge tournaments, as I am a medical doctor but have no prescription writing email. Now, that's a shorter email, which includes, again, potentially even more damaging revelations, And what I read when I read that, right, is you can imagine this is a kind of note you would say to your boss. Okay, if we don't come to an agreement, I've already written my resignation letter, and this is the resignation letter I will send to everyone in the company. It says some nice things about you. It also says some unkind things about you. Hope you don't mind. Right? That's how that reads to me. Now, again, it's not clear if this was ever sent to anyone. It's not clear if it was sent to Boris Nikolic. It's not clear if it was ever sent to Bill Gates. But again, I think it shows you what kind of maneuver Epstein is potentially considering in this situation and what he's capable of. Bill Gates, as you'd imagine, for his part, has denied everything included in these drafts. So a representative for Bill Gates says, these claims from a proven disgruntled liar are absolutely absurd and completely false. The only thing these documents demonstrate is Epstein's frustration that he did not have an ongoing relationship with Gates and the lengths he would go to entrap and defame. I'll go to you on this. We've got more on this story, sort of some older context that I think sort of brings a bit more light to this. But I want to go to you first. Do you read these emails in sort of the same way I read them? It's strange because it's an email from Epstein to Epstein. So it doesn't prove that much on its own. But to me, it does suggest a strategy.
I mean, it doesn't prove that Nikolic sent those emails, but it does prove that blackmail is something which comes naturally enough to Jeffrey Epstein that he can write these emails in a way which is very structured, lays out the demands and lays out the leverage. Now, if I had to guess, I would say, all right, the fact that it manages to condense so much potentially compromising information along with such clear and tangible demands, that makes me think this wouldn't be his first rodeo, is what I would have to say. And one of the things that has come out through the Epstein files and the photographs of Epstein's mansion is that, of course, there are these beds, but then there are these weird cameras in the corner. Now, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the gender elements of this a bit later, so I don't want to get too hung up on it. But it might be that he was very worried about these bedrooms getting robbed. It might be that he was worried about slipping and falling and cracking his head open and no one would be around to save him. The only other reason that I can think of is that it's a way of collecting compromising sexual material on people who are staying at his house.
Let's look at two pieces of previous reporting. that I think might sort of help us to contextualize, interpret these new emails. So the first is a 2023 article from the Wall Street Journal. The claim made in this article is that Jeffrey Epstein appeared to threaten Bill Gates over an affair that Bill Gates had with a Russian bridge player. Remember, in that email there was sort of reference to Adderall for bridge tournaments, and also Russian girls. This is a peculiar story in many ways because the two most important bits of context is, first, Jeffrey Epstein wanted something from Bill Gates, which was for Bill Gates to invest $100 million, very humble people, in a charitable venture of his. Now, Epstein wanted this charitable venture both to provide him with a personal income so he'd get a certain cut, sort of to manage the funds, and also to help launder his reputation. And he believed that if Bill Gates got on board, other billionaires would follow. So he wanted to have this fabulous foundation, and Bill Gates would give £100 million, and then he'd go to all of these other billionaires and say, look, if Bill Gates is investing, I know I'm a convicted paedophile, but Bill Gates is investing, which means it must be okay. So that's what he really wanted from Bill Gates. Now on to the leverage. What was potentially his leverage, according to this article from the Wall Street Journal? Well, that's where the Russian bridge player comes in. So this is Mila Antonova. She's a Russian bridge player who met Bill Gates at a bridge tournament where they reportedly began an affair. That's a screenshot from a YouTube video she did about meeting Bill Gates. Now, Antonova had an idea to start an online business to teach people how to play bridge, and she sought funds for it. And in 2013, Boris Nikolic, so the Gates advisor we met earlier, who Jeffrey Epstein appeared to be sort of drafting an email from, introduced Antonova to Jeffrey Epstein. And the Wall Street Journal reported this about why this introduction was apparently made. So Antonova and Nikolic met at Epstein's townhouse in November 2013, where she presented her proposal to Epstein, who provided feedback, documents show. She was looking to raise $500,000 for the venture, which she called Bridge Planet. Now, its mission was to promote bridge by creating quality tutorials for beginners and advanced players. So she's got a project, sounds like quite a nice project, to be fair. Nikolic, who's an associate of Bill Gates, has introduced her to Epstein as someone who could potentially fund this venture. Now, Epstein ultimately didn't fund that venture. However, in 2014, Antonova stayed at Epstein's townhouse. She told the paper, I didn't interact with him or with anyone else there. However, Epstein would later go on to pay for her to take a software engineering course. So Antonova apparently decided this website wasn't really a goer. She'll retrain as a software engineer, and Epstein pays for that course. So we have Epstein building up a relationship with a woman who Gates is alleged to have had an affair with. We also have Epstein desperate for Gates to invest in his charitable foundation. And that's where the alleged threat comes in. So this is from that Wall Street Journal article again. In 2017, Epstein contacted Gates about the Russian bridge player, years after the relationship had ended, according to people familiar with the matter. He sent an email to Gates asking to be reimbursed for the costs of Antonova's coding school, the people said. The sum was immaterial for the two men, and the tone of the message was that Epstein knew about the affair and could expose it, the people said. The spokeswoman for Gates said he didn't make a payment. Mr. Gates had no financial dealings with Epstein, she said. So you got this email, sort of, oh, by the way, maybe you could pay me back for this coding course I paid for the girl that you had an affair with, even though the money suggested here is trivial. So it seems as if, Epstein is saying, okay, so you don't want to invest in my charitable foundation? Well, maybe you could pay for the coding course I paid for the girl you had an affair with, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So you can, it's not me making that inference, that's the Wall Street Journal making that inference. So again, I think a relevant story. You can see how knowledge might become leverage, which might become a threat. On that occasion, there is no evidence that it did lead to any kind of payment. The idea Gates never had any financial dealings with Epstein, though, is a bit harder to sustain. So this is an article from 2019, so a bit earlier. This was from The New Yorker. So the article is about how the MIT Media Lab concealed funding from Jeffrey Epstein long after he had been convicted as a sex offender. Now, the MIT Media Lab, it runs research groups. It brings together technologists, designers, social theorists, a sort of interdisciplinary, forward-thinking institute, the kind of thing high-flying elites might like to fund. They often do. For our purposes, these are the key emails in that extensive article. So in 2014, the director of the MIT Media Lab, Joshi Ito, emailed the director of development and strategy, Peter Cohen, and said, quote, Heil, this is a $2 million gift from Bill Gates, directed by Jeffrey Epstein. Cohen, who's the Director of Development and Strategy, responds saying this, great! For gift recording purposes, we will not be mentioning Jeffrey's name as the impetus for this gift. I've let 2 folks in central development who need to know. So obviously only the people who need to know will know that this money is from Jeffrey Epstein or directed by Jeffrey Epstein. What does that mean? Now, when this exchange was first reported, a spokesperson for Gates told The New Yorker any claim that Epstein directed any programmatic or personal grant-making for Bill Gates is completely false. Again, there isn't a smoking gun here. It's possible Epstein was bullshitting, so it could be that, maybe he transferred the MIT lab $2 million and just claimed it was from Bill Gates because we know he thought that associating with Bill Gates would make him seem cleaner. Maybe it is that he had persuaded Bill Gates to give this $2 million. I mean, also the way that email is structured, they don't say we got this via Jeffrey Epstein from Bill Gates. They say we got this from Bill Gates, directed by Jeffrey Epstein, which is quite a different claim. But again, you're seeing clues to a potential sort of relationship whereby Epstein had damaging information on Bill Gates, and Bill Gates was pressured to provide financial support to Epstein and reputational support to Epstein, which he may or may not have, I suppose, deferred to, have acted upon.
So the thing that I kind of want to talk about is, why would the revelation of an affair be so damaging to Bill Gates? All right. Plenty of people have affairs. It's in the news all the time. Why would this be such a big deal? Well, when he married Melinda Gates, there was no prenuptial agreement.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So when they eventually did divorce, which I think was in 2021, they had to come up with a negotiated settlement contract. There was something like $130 billion worth of assets to divide. There was also stocks and shares, so on and so forth. So it's wrong to think about this as my wife might be upset with me and she might make me sleep on the couch, right? I think that by the time you're having affairs of, potentially that frequency, right? Russian girls plural rather than Russian girls singular. And you're getting your mates involved and it's something of an open secret. And you're thinking about, allegedly anyway, thinking about surreptitiously slipping your wife antibiotics to rid her of an STD that you gave her. I would say that the love is somewhat dead, right? We're not talking about a marriage of love and being afraid of hurting Melinda Gates. It's, well, if I drive her to the point of divorcing me, I could half my net worth by tomorrow. And so that's the real nature of the leverage there.
We should say the details of what he's saying Bill Gates has done, Bill Gates has obviously disputed. And also that it's also very possible that when you are threatening someone with leverage, you say, and I could exaggerate.
Well, you
So
throw
it's
the
possible.
kitchen sink.
Yeah. So I don't think we can read from this that Bill Gates did everything in that email, but a threat to exaggerate is only threatening if there is something there.
Well, if there's some degree of plausibility to it.
Yeah.
And that plausibility might not be because it's true and it happened. It might be, well, it's coming from me and I'm a trusted person. There's lots of reasons why a threat can be plausible. But I mean, I'm a believer in Occam's razor.
Yeah, I mean, it also might have just happened exactly as it was described. We don't know. The latest leak has another telling exchange with another billionaire, which is very much related to this story. So this is between Richard Branson and Jeffrey Epstein, pictured here on Epstein's island. They've clearly been talking about how Epstein can be welcomed back into polite society. And this is an email from Richard Branson to Jeffrey Epstein. This is from September the 11th, 2013. Dear Jeffrey, it was really nice seeing you yesterday. The boys in water sports can't stop speaking about it. Anytime you're in the area, would love to see you, as long as you bring your harem, which is already pretty gross. But then this, point one. I think if Bill Gates was willing to say that you've been a brilliant advisor to him, that you slipped up many years ago by sleeping with a 17-and-a-half-year-old woman and were punished for it, that you've more than learnt your lesson and have done nothing that's against the law since, And yes, as a single man, you seem to have a penchant for women. But there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, something along those lines. The rest of it is details I'm not going to read. So I think this is a really interesting insight into what very rich people think about Epstein at the time and what they're all discussing. So this idea, you slipped up. Yes, you've been found guilty of procuring a minor for sex. But, I think probably Epstein had told him they were 17 and a half. It's a slip up. You're an interesting guy with lots of money. Let's see what we can do. Now, before I go to you, actually, I just want to make a clarification, which I think is quite important, because I was looking before this show. What would someone have known in 2013 about the ages of the girls that Jeffrey Epstein had procured sex with or groomed? And there was reporting from the police and from media sources that the girls were as young as 14. So that was in the public domain. But in the plea bargain, so what Jeffrey Epstein had been found guilty of in a court of law, and what he had, I suppose, pled guilty to, because that's why he got that really, sweet deal, just said under 18. So you can imagine Epstein have said, oh yeah, there were all sorts of salacious things written in the newspapers, but all I've actually been found guilty of is procuring sex from an under 18-year-old. And the only reason I admitted to that is because there was a girl who was 17 and a half, and they had proof of that. So you can see, I think doing due diligence and looking up the reporting, the very credible reporting at the time that was saying they were 14 would have been a good idea. But you can see how this would have happened, I suppose. I want your thoughts on this.
Well, one of the things that's been popping up on social media is that when the Me Too allegations first broke, there seemed to be this full court press to sort of, in parts of the media to say, well, this is just a form of hysteria, right? What you're trying to do is make it seem criminal and violent for powerful men to enjoy themselves sexually, right? And to not marry every single woman who they have sex with. And there seemed to be this kind of a culture war around it, and a culture war where one side was trying to say, how dare you demonize ordinary sexual behavior? And something which I didn't think of at the time, and now I am thinking of, is like, well, maybe that does look like ordinary sexual behavior to you. Maybe the treatment of women as a sexual commodity, their utter dehumanization and instrumentalization for that purpose, to the extent that it doesn't matter if your mate gets done on a paedophilia charge, maybe that is normal to you. And again, we can talk about how is it that these men have come to that idea. Like, what is it that's in the environment that they're in which normalizes that for them? But it sort of strikes me that was what some of that Me Too backlash was being driven by. It was a sense of, well, if you're demonizing this guy for behaving that way, or that guy for behaving that way, then you're going to look at, the sexual proclivities of me and my friends. And we don't want that to come into question.
Let's look at, you were talking earlier, you said earlier, we won't look at the gendered aspect of this as if sort of like I said, Ash, I know this is a Jeffrey Epstein story, but let's not focus on gender. I didn't say that, by the way, but we are going to more explicitly discuss
He said, aiming the revolver under the desk.
Why does everything have to be about gender? It's just, all it was doing was...
It's just sex trafficking.
Just sex trafficking women by powerful men, It's not necessarily gendered. But men get trafficked too, and women traffic men. I don't know if women traffic men. They probably don't. Okay, let's look at how two different people say they related to Epstein during this period. And we're going to look at Bill Gates and his ex-wife, Melinda Gates. So this is Bill Gates speaking in 2021.
Can you explain your relationship with Epstein? Did you have any concerns? Was there ever any concerns you had about it?
Oh, certainly. I had several dinners with him. hoping that what he said about getting billions of philanthropy for global health through contacts that he had might emerge. When it looked like that wasn't a real thing, that relationship ended. But it was a huge mistake to spend time with him, to give him the credibility of, being there. There were lots of others in that same situation, but I made a mistake.
I made a mistake. He thought, I'll believe the guy, whatever, no biggie. Now contrast that to Melinda.
I also met Jeffrey Epstein exactly one time.
Did you?
Yes, because I wanted to see who this man was. And I regretted it from the second I stepped in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards. So, my heart breaks for these young women because that's how I felt. And here I'm an older woman. My God, I feel terrible for those young women. It's awful.
So we were talking before the show, Ash, and obviously, I think probably the most obvious read there is cynicism, right? Bill Gates is sort of saying he didn't realize the gravity of it because obviously if he had realized the gravity of it and then continued the relationship, that would look really bad to him. And if he said, he had compromat on me, that would also look really bad for him. So you can easily see that as just a PR answer from Bill Gates. You can also see it as a PR answer from Melinda Gates because she's not implicated. So sort of saying, I found him sick from the day one, that makes her look good. But we were also saying there is, we recognize in sort of relationships we have that sometimes men in general can be like, maybe he's all right. And then women will be like, I saw from day dot that he was a creep.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot to crack into. So one that's also a post-divorce interview. So it could be read as sort of sticking the knife in a bit and trying to distance herself from someone who was financially involved in businesses and organizations and individuals that she was also involved in. You can read it that way. But I think if we're going to look at the gendered element of this, the way in which I read the Epstein story in terms of what's been made public so far is that he was at the center of this complex network of very powerful, very wealthy people. And part of how that network functioned in terms of trust and people feeling like they knew each other and owed each other and they were part of the same club was the procurement of women for sexual purposes, some of whom were underage, some of whom were legally children. It wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't just women. It could be that he knew how to cater to anybody's taste, and that was part of his web of manipulation. But I think that while a sexual interest in underage women was a core part of his sexuality, it wasn't necessarily the case that it was a core part of the sexuality of everyone else who was involved. There's some complex things about the ways in which society sort of socializes people to think that the most sexually attractive woman is the one that looks most like a child. But we can get into that another day. But I don't think that everyone was necessarily actively involved in the paedophilia. I think that how you end up thinking it is normal for someone to come with a harem, in Richard Branson's words, or to procure beautiful, clever, trustworthy, Russian women, for Prince Andrew, or, whatever else.
Because also trustworthy doesn't mean we'll give you good financial advice, right? Trustworthy means won't
discreet,
tell.
Will keep quiet. And in other of these emails as well, the word discreet comes up a lot. And it's a sort of mark of, go for this one, she's discreet. The only way in which you can think that's normal, right? Because that's not how the world operates, all right? In my social circle, to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a great deal of procuring of women for sexual purposes. I think
That's what happens in grooming gangs.
I mean,
right? We don't, in normal society, I've never procured someone for someone else or been procured for. It's not relatable for a normal person.
No, it's not an ordinary part of people's worlds. I think that what it plays on is that I think that there can be an abusive element to what it is people fantasize about, right? Lots of people have fantasies about being like one man and being fawned over by all these sexually available women. if you actually have the money and the power to make that happen, that's actually kind of like nightmarish and disgusting. Do you know what I mean? Like, like there is something about that which is so deeply wrong. But I think that there is this element of many of these men, and I'm not, this isn't me making excuses at all. It's just me trying to say, I think that this is part of the psychology, is that they're the kind of guys who go, yeah, but the stripper really likes me. Right? You know, the stripper really likes me. And I think it's often the case that women look at that behavior and think that at best it's pathetic, at worst it's completely predatory. But men don't necessarily read it that way in other men. And we were chatting about this before we went live, is that we talked about how you can have a completely different read on people because one person, quite often a man, will read that person as just being sort of sexually permissive and something of a libertine, and another person, quite often a woman, will say, no, this isn't a sort of free love consensual adventure. There is something that is really disquieting and violent that's underpinning it. And so I don't think that that's the most important part of this story, but I think that tells you a little bit of how it was seemingly so socially embedded amongst this group of elite men, that they'd be exchanging emails and making jokes about it. You know, that in Elon Musk's emails with Epstein, sort of wild parties, the ratio, which seems to be referring to a gender ratio, is the only way in which I can think of it, that this stuff is so well known and no one thinks it's weird.
As I said, today we're just focusing on these three particular aspects. Gates, Prince Andrew, Peter Mandelson. I mean, I think the Peter Mandelson story at least is going to continue to roll on, but we will later in the week also just be digging into more aspects of these files because there's so much interesting stuff here. We're not going to ignore Chomsky either. I know it might seem convenient for us to ignore Noam Chomsky, but we will come to him later in the week. But we want to do sort of all of these dives into the papers sort of responsibly and well, which meant that we didn't want to do all of them in one show. So I hope you enjoyed, strange word, found this interesting or useful, even if a bit gross.
It's left me with a really not nice feeling about men, to be honest. Like being close to the story and reading about it and I know, hashtag not all men and blah, 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 blah. Like this is like effectively like an elite network of, incredibly rich, incredibly powerful individuals. But I'm going to be going home tonight giving every man I see the stink eye. And I'm sorry, I will be.
Because there is an element of it. People often say about homosexual men that, because it's very, in a kind of fun, lighthearted way, this is what straight men would do if women were like men, which is just have sex all the time and it'd be very casual.
You need to say speaking as a, because you're going to get cancelled.
Speaking as a homosexual. It's definitely, it's I'm quite like the genders are different, and I think like men are more casual about sex, and that's why gay men just have sex all the time. There is a really depressing way of looking at this, I suppose, is that, and that's why gay men behave differently to straight men, because they have the opportunity. So all men would have that much promiscuous sex if they could, but gay men get to because they're having sex with men, and so that's sort of what all men would be like if they could. The most depressing way of looking at this is this what lots of men would be like if they could? Because clearly these men have so much, they have the ultimate access. They can do anything. And so the most depressing way of looking at this is if all men were as rich as Jeffrey Epstein, maybe there would be a lot more Jeffrey Epsteins. I don't want to say I hold to that, but
no, the thing is I don't know. I think that one thing that I would say is that what's really obvious to me from reading through the Epstein emails is that these men, and perhaps this is representative of most men, are so vulnerable to being manipulated by sex. And I'm not saying that women can't be manipulated. I mean, look at some of my exes, like clearly they were doing something. I just don't think that women are necessarily as manipulated by sex. It actually might be by love or by validation or something else. But there is something about a man that he can go into a bedroom with a woman, look at the camera up in the corner and be like, that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, and then also be quite relaxed about other men, sort of looking, always giving the benefit of the doubt, I suppose, is probably a much more, for that particular sort of type of behaviour. Okay, before we get too deep into gender essentialism, we will wrap up there. As I said earlier, this has been a very, very long show. We have spoken for about an hour and 45 minutes. If you have enjoyed the show, if you want to help us make more shows, I mean, if we had more resources, we'd probably happily do more longer shows. But you can go to novaramedia.com/support. Obviously, a longer show doesn't just mean that me and Ash stay here longer. It means that our production team stay longer. It means there's more editing to do, more segments to put out. So resources really, really do matter. The electricities, these lights have to stay on for longer.
Get these lights off.
Get these lights off. That's why it's lucky I put the powder on. So if you enjoyed this very, very long show, and if you want to sort of enjoy more Novara Media shows, please do consider becoming a subscriber or a supporter, at Novara Media novaramedia.com/support. Anything you can afford is brilliant, fantastic. You can go there for a one-off payment, or you can go there to sign up for a monthly donation. Of course, a monthly donation is preferable, but whatever you feel able to do would be brilliant. Thank you so much. Speak in the eye, Michael, because you are not talking about me, and I am still a man, and I don't think about sex like that. True. I think always this is about tendencies. Are men more likely to think in this way? Are women more likely to think in this way? There are always huge exceptions. It's not just small exceptions, huge exceptions. Let's wrap up there. Ash, I'm so glad that you were here for this hour and 50 minutes with me.
I'm really glad to. I'm so hungry though, so you better wrap up this fucking show.
Let's wrap up this show. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.